Hello, all you beautiful babies, you. How are you doing today? That's right. Pat's here. It's okay. Don't worry. Everything's fine. Except if you're Disney. Then things are getting worse. 2023 has not been a great year for Disney. In fact, I would say it's been pretty abysmal. Now, I've seen other people say, well, hey, they still make money from the theme parks. They're still selling lots of merchandise. It doesn't matter that the stock keeps going down. Disney Plus is losing them money, and all of their movies really aren't performing on the standard that they used to. But it'll be okay. This is embarrassing in a lot of ways. This says more about Disney than it does about Sony, while also saying a lot about Sony and how their patience has rewarded them, or the taking risks has rewarded them. So, Spider Man Across the Spider Verse opened to $120 million. That is a higher opening weekend than Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which opened to 118 million, Ant-Man 3, which opened to 118 million. It's higher than any Disney animated film that's come out recently. It obviously isn't as high as the Super Mario Brothers movie and some other recent Illumination stuff is about performed on this part, but still, we're just talking superhero movies that have come out this year. This is the biggest opening for a superhero film so far this year. Had the biggest opening day of the year, $51 million. Now, obviously, it didn't keep that momentum up over the 3 day, but I didn't really expect it to. I don't think this was going to open to 150, 160 million. Um, Here's the crazy thing. The previous Spider-Man Spider-Verse film opened to 35 million. Let's just I'm just going to put Spider in the search cuz it should come up. There we go. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse 2018, 5 years ago. Okay? $90 million budget. Obviously, Lord and Miller, they hire directors, they write the screenplay, they produce this. Wins the Oscar for Best Animated Feature, critically acclaimed. $35 million opening weekend. Now, the film held very well, came out in the holiday season, so it had good holds going into Christmas and New Year's. Ended up making 190 million domestic, 384 million worldwide. Not bad. I'd say the film made a decent little profit. But this happening 5 years later, I mean, this is like the equivalent of, I don't want to compare it to The Dark Knight, but it's not far off, where Batman Begins had an opening weekend of 48 million in 2005, and then in 2008 The Dark Knight opened to 158 million. To go from a $35 million opening to a $120 million opening shows you how popular that first Spider-Verse film has continued, how popular the character of Spider-Man has remained as an IP. I think a lot of the success of this also should be attributed to No Way Home, which made $2 billion. I just think it's all part of the same thing now. Now, obviously, the international numbers aren't groundbreaking. The first film didn't do that great internationally. It did about the same it did domestically. So the 88 million is a little but apparently the budget to this film is anywhere from 100 to 150 million. So Sony just has to be happy right now. But the big lesson to take away from this, above anything else, is audiences are clearly craving something different. Audiences want something fresh and new and different. They want you to do animated films in different styles that isn't the traditional Disney aesthetic, or the Pixar aesthetic, or the DreamWorks aesthetic. Clearly, people want narrative changes. People want you to take risks with your story. I think one reason No Way Home was such a big hit was because it had the three Spider-Men come together, and it had done something that we hadn't seen in a Marvel movie up until that point. I think with the current MCU films, the biggest issue is they're doing stuff we've seen before. Nothing with Ant-Man 3, Guardians 3, Doctor Strange 2, Black Panther 2. It feels like stuff that already happened. They're not upping the game anymore. They're not changing things. They're not doing things with their storytelling and with their visual design that's really that different from what we've seen. And I think Disney's hurting because of that. Just like I think in their animated department, they're not really trying any kind of styles. I mean, the kinetic mix of different sort of live action 2D, 3D footage of the Spider-Verse films really is connecting with people. They want to go see something that doesn't look like all the other movies that come out. And Disney never goes away from this formula. And it's really damaging them, I think, in a lot of ways because they're trying to cash in on nostalgia. But I think audiences are at a point where, unless a franchise is really doing something exciting, like the John Wick franchise or in the Mario movie, right? It's pretty generic, but nobody had done a big budget animated video game movie like that before, except for like Wreck It Ralph. But even look at the Fast X franchise. Look at this franchise, how it's dropped off. It's because they've been doing the same kind of crap for the last three movies and they haven't done anything that new or exciting. So yeah, the movie's made $600 million, but it cost $350 million. So I don't know. Guardians 3 is doing really well. It's at 780 million. So kudos to James Gunn and team. The movie did good. It's not a bomb. I think it did better than people were expecting it to do after the last few MCU films didn't do well. But I hope that studios learn a lesson here from Spider-Verse. That it's okay to give filmmakers like Lord and Miller a property, a big IP, because I don't think the key is making original films. I had a discussion with a friend about that the other day. They said, well, just make original movies. I go, no, it's not original movies. You have to take IPs that already exist and do something new and original with that IP. That's the key. People still want the IPs. People still want the nostalgia. I think original movies have a lot harder time now than they've ever had to be successful. But that doesn't mean that you can't make an original film inside of something that's already existed before. And I think that's the key to a lot of success going forward. Obviously James Cameron has Avatar, the John Wick franchise was its own franchise. There are exceptions to this rule. But generally the films that make the big money are sequels or a reboot of a certain franchise. And I'm just blown away by this. This opening weekend, I mean, we all expected this to do well. I thought 90 million was pretty much guaranteed, maybe 100 million, but 120 million is phenomenal. This is the biggest movie for Lord and Miller. They've never made anything that opened this big. I think their previous opening weekend that was their biggest was the Lego movie, opened to 69 million. 22 Jump Street had like a 57 million opening weekend. They've had movies open well, but they've never had something cross 100 million. The film's getting rave reviews. There's just a lot of positive for Sony's animation department and the Spider-Man franchise. I mean, at this point, it's hard to not just say it's crazy. There's two concurrent trilogies going on with Spider-Man in live action and animated, and they're all huge hits and receiving positive reviews. I don't think that's ever happened before in the history of movies. So that's pretty interesting in itself. Speaking of Disney, let's talk about The Little Mermaid. I've seen some people try to spin this narrative. Well, it's holding well domestically, so it could make a profit. Here's the issue. Yes, the film is holding decent in domestic numbers, right? It's at 186 million. It should be able to make $300 million domestically. It should be able to scratch to that number with the way it's going. But the international numbers aren't there. When I made the Little Mermaid video before previously, some people were saying the movie will make money. What are you talking about? You don't understand. This movie cost over $200 million. They spent over $100 million marketing it. This movie has to make like $700 million for them to be okay about it. But they were expecting $1 billion. All the live action Disney remakes, excluding like Cinderella and a couple of other ones, were $1 billion movies. They don't make a $250 million movie and being like, oh, it's only going to make 500 million. That's where this film's going. Right now, the current trajectory is between 550 million to 600 million. Deadline had a whole article about this to where the film isn't going to break even if the numbers stay the way they are right now. That's not good. Okay, to have a film that doesn't even break even, not that it didn't make the profits like Guardians of the Galaxy 3, right? Maybe it didn't make the profits that they would hope for on the high end, but it's still going to make a profit. They're going to make money off of it. This film, on the other hand, they're going to lose a little bit of money on it or just barely get by. The current projection is like a loss around 40 million or something if this only makes $500 million. And that's what it looks like, man. I mean, you got those international numbers are terrible. I mean, and I'm surprised. I thought this movie would mostly do well internationally. This is a sign you don't want in the current modern day box office. You don't want your domestic total to be that much ahead of your international total 2 weeks in. That's always a bad sign. That means the international total is slowing down. which means this film might struggle to make $300 million internationally. That's the thing they're dealing with right now. So the Little Mermaid, this whole situation is not good, despite it holding, decently in the United States and Canada. It's doing well there, but even at that level, it's not like doing amazing business. It's not making $450 million. Something that would have really put it over the top. And once again, Spider-Man opened better than that movie did over its opening weekend. So once again, I mean, I know I've been harping on Disney lately, but it's got to be said, this is not good. This is just not good for them. And I know maybe they get a little piece of the Spider-Man part. You could credit them a little bit for Spider-Verse's success because they did help kind of revitalize that whole franchise, and there is connectivity between that. But I don't think they make any money off the Spider-Verse movies like they do off the MCU Spidey films when they have like Doctor Strange was in, the last Spider-Man live action film. So this is really interesting. I'm not quite sure where this is going. It's also curious that the next Spider-Verse film's coming out in March. We're not getting a year-long break, so I'm curious about how that film's going to do. You have to assume it's going to open to at least 100 million, but does it open better than this film is a question, especially since it's an earlier release and not a summer release. I'm not sure. The Boogeyman opened to 12.3 million, another Disney movie. Not great. I'm sure the budget wasn't that high, but you know, with the modern day horror movie, you need to do a little bit better than that. Like Evil Dead Rise, for instance, even though that's an IP franchise, it opened at 24 million and has made 145 million worldwide. So you got to do a little bit better than that. John Wick 4 continues to be a very successful movie. It's at $432 million worldwide. I think it's probably going to wrap up domestically somewhere around 188 million, and then I don't know, $435 million worldwide. But it's already made its money. The studio has to just be excited as hell. Mario finally crossed 1.3 billion, which makes it by far the biggest movie of the year. And I don't know anything coming out that's going to make more money than this. I mean, Aquaman 2, The Flash, Mission Impossible 7, or any of those movies going to make 1.3 billion? I think a couple of those films have a chance to make over $1 billion, don't get me wrong, but are they going to have an international number of 733 million? I'm not sure. That's going to be tough to beat. Which is crazy because this will be the first time in a long time that a non-Disney film, excluding COVID, obviously, where like Bad Boys for Life was the biggest film the year it came out. But like last year, Avatar 2 was the biggest film, and that was technically Disney. Although they didn't really produce it. James Cameron was already working on it. But yeah, it looks like Universal might win this year, which is pretty crazy. Unless, like, once again, something from Disney like blows up and is unexpected and becomes a big hit. But I guess the Marvels, if Marvels turns out to be a big hit, but I just don't see it, man. I don't see any of those movies outperforming Mario. Spider-Verse, though, credit to Lord and Miller. They've been in the industry a long time, going back to Clone High. They worked on How I Met Your Mother. They worked on the 21 Jump Street movies. They did the Lego movie franchise, which petered out after that first Lego movie. The sequel didn't do as well. They did spin-offs, and now it feels like a dead franchise. This, on the other hand, I think currently, because they've stayed so close to it, could be a franchise that has successful spin-offs, as long as they keep these budgets down around the $100 million mark. I think they've been very clever to budget these films, although I'm assuming this film costs more than that. I think the $150 million number that's floated around is more accurate, especially when you read about the film and how many people they had working on it. But still, this is just a huge success. This blew out any expectation that was being projected. This overperformed. This sets this up as a franchise now officially with Miles Morales. And it's pretty crazy that this same year we're going to have a Spider-Man sequel animated film that did this well, and then the video game sequels coming out later this year for the PlayStation, which I'm assuming is going to be a big hit and sell at least 20 to 25 million copies over the course of its run. So Spider-Man right now is where Batman was at that point where Dark Knight and the Arkham games were coming out. Spider-Man is peaking as an IP right now, which I know sounds crazy because you could argue back when Spider-Man 300 sold the most comic issues. It was one of the highest selling comics ever at the time. The Todd McFarlane cover. You know that you could say that was peak Spider-Man, and the cartoon was on. But honestly, the fact that there's live action movies making money right now, there's an animated franchise making money, and then there's a video game franchise making money, and they're all well reviewed and are billion-dollar franchises essentially. Um, Spider-Man's never had that. This is across the board. Like, Spider-Man is translating with people, they're connecting with it. Sony has handled the brand very well. They paid 7 million for this in 1998. That's all they paid for Spider-Man was 7 million dollars. That's pretty insane when you think about how much money they've made with it now. And here we are, the first Spider-Man movie, came out 21 years ago, and we're still getting Spider-Man movies, and they're still opening really well. I mean, obviously, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man opening to 114 million in 2002 is more impressive than this. That's insane when adjusted for inflation, how big of an opening weekend that movie had. So I acknowledge that if you adjust things for inflation, more people went to go see Spider-Man back then than probably now. But at the same time, you also have to factor in franchise fatigue and how it's not affecting Spider. And they almost lost this at one point with the Andrew Garfield movies. I mean, Amazing Spider-Man 2 did not do great business. So kudos to Sony. Kudos for them to trust Lord and Miller. Disney lost these guys on Solo, and it just looks like a worse and worse decision by the day. Um, so yeah, this is a big deal. It feels like this is going to win the Oscar for animated feature too. So this is the only sequel I can think of outside of Toy Story 2 that did this well and is critically acclaimed. The Toy Story franchise is the only comparison I can think of right now, where all the films were incredibly well reviewed, and then each film made like more money and became more of a blockbuster as it went along. That's the only comp that I could think of right now. But the big thing here, not to just make it all about Disney, but I do think the way we've been talking about how Disney's animated features haven't been performing well, and Mario did so well. The fact that this animated film now is outperforming Disney stuff, like Disney can't have an animated film that opens to 120 million unless it's called Frozen. Pixar has no chance at an opening this big, unless it's The Incredibles 3, or something like that. And I don't even know if that would open that well, but I think it would still do very well. I think it's a big enough franchise. This is crazy. This just really puts things in perspective of where we are right now. I think studios need to take a note from this. Do something different. Do something different creatively. Do something different with your filmmaking style. Trust the creatives that have proven themselves. Don't give people who haven't proven themselves these IPs. I think that's stupid. But there's other people out there that are like Lord and Miller that have been around a while. And if you gave them the right property, they might be able to give you gold. And I think Sony has learned that lesson recently. So I just love this. I just love seeing good producing and good product. And even waiting 5 years to release this, I think benefited them in a lot of ways. It built anticipation. It feels like a long time since the first movie came out. Because this could have come out 2 or 3 years later, and I don't know if it would have done as well. I think this was right timing. I think everything kind of just came together for them right now. Spider-Man rules the superhero movie world right now. And don't forget it.